See, oh, um, many of you are familiar that I got to meet when we were at the ECI Summit in Dallas. So it's great to see some familiar faces. It's also great to see some new faces and names that are some of you who are with us today. So as you're aware, what we're going to be talking about is intentionally designing mentoring programs. Over our course of our time together today, I'm going to begin with introductions. We're going to do an overview of some of the outcomes. We are then going to delve into some content sprinkled very heavily with some opportunities for interactions, dialogue, sharing, and questions. I think you have wonderful opportunities like we did at the ECI Summit to extend some of the learning from one another within a guided plan. So with that, the first thing that I want to do while we're doing a brief round of introductions, and I was going to have everyone do this in the chat, but we'll ask you instead to maybe take turns and unmute and just share your name, your affiliation, and I'm going to ask you to also state which blob on the blob tree best represents how you're feeling today. I'm curious to know if any of you are familiar with the blob tree. Have any of you ever seen it before? I'm scrolling, trying to make eye contact. I'm seeing some heads shaking no. So just very quickly, let me give you a little background because this is a great strategy to use for check-ins, for connections. The blob tree was created like way back in the early 2000s by Pip Wilson, and it was created when in his work with children and building literacy skills. It has taken off in the counseling worlds and in other areas. And we've also seen in the Zoomathons and Zoom interactions, people using it much like we're doing today. Essentially, the blobs are real simple. They allow for us to communicate emotions, our place, our thinking, void of some common generalizations. Hence, they're gender neutral. They're very relatable. So look at the blob tree. Look at, from an emotional standpoint, a sense of how they represent different feelings, and think about where you're at today. And I'll go first. I'll say, for example, again, I'm Elizabeth Beavers. I'm an associate professor at the University of Houston, Clear Lake. I've been honored to be working with Health and Human Services and the UTEP team. And I would place myself at a 7 this morning. I'm at the end of a summer semester. My son just had a major knee surgery yesterday, and I just feel like I'm hanging on for dear life to kind of get to the holiday weekend. And then hopefully Tuesday, I'll feel like 20. So with that, I'm just going to go in the order that I see you. I'm going to ask Rhonda if she'll go first.
My name is Rhonda Shedd, and I'm a team leader for Project Niños ECI in the Corpus Christi area. And I think I actually feel like a 10 right now. So that's pretty good. I know. I feel that I'm on top of my game. Everything's going okay. We're good. So
Yay. Wonderful. Stephanie.
Can y'all hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Good morning. I'm Stephanie Stiggins. I'm one of the team coordinators at the Lubbock ECI program. And I think I'm probably at a 7-2, kind of like I'm just holding on. We've got our director and our other two team leaders are out for various reasons this week. And so I feel like I'm just kind of holding on as well.
All right. Thank you. Lauren.
Hi, my name is Lauren Wiggins. I'm the Assistant Director of the ECI program at the Harris Center in Houston, Texas. And I feel like I'm a 15 because I am supported by my other assistant directors and the team, and I do smile a lot. So I picked number 15.
Thank you. Anisha.
Hello, I'm Anisha Phillips, the Senior Director for ECI program at My Health, My Resources of Tarrant County. I probably feel like a 9. Yeah. Nice to see you all.
All right. Well, thank you. Let's go to Crystal, and then after Crystal, we'll go Jesse and then Molly.
Hi, everybody. I'm Crystal Full, and I am the Assistant Director for the ECI program in the Rio Grande Valley. And I would say that I'm probably also a 15, kind of just sitting steady, getting everything done. Happy that we're coming up on a long weekend for a little break, spend time with the family.
Hi, everyone. I am Jesse Perez from Easter Seal Central, Texas. I'm a team lead for early intervention specialists. And I today am an 18. I feel like normally I'm like a 16, but last night our kid did not sleep very well. So I will pat you on the back. I just won't lift you today.
Love it.
Hi, I'm Molly Wheeler. I'm one of the regional directors at ECI program of at MHMR of Tarrant County. I feel like I could be in a lot of these places. 9 is definitely, I guess, speaking to me. I'm holding on for dear life, but I also see it as something fun because I did take an extra day off, so I'll have a 4-day weekend. So I'm seeing it both ways today.
Fantastic. All right, my order just got all messed up. All right, here we go. I'm gonna ask Stephanie to go. Wait, Stephanie, you went. No. My order just got messed up. Let's see here. I am going to ask Sarah to go next, then Joanne, then Kelsey.
I'm Sarah. I'm the regional director with My Health, My Resources of Tarrant County, and I am probably a 10 today.
Great.
My name is Joanne. I'm the PA for Quality Improvement at LifePath Systems, ECI. I would say I'm a 16 for sure. We have a lot of staff that are kind of new, and we have a PA leaving us. And so it's just kind of trying to hold everybody up, but trying to do it with a smile on my face.
Great. Kelsey?
I'm Kelsey Roski. I'm the EIS supervisor here at Helen Firm Centers in Wichita Falls, and I'm a 1. I have 2 tiny children, a baby and a 2-year-old that my husband's out of town, so that's fun. Plus our directors are about to be out for 3 weeks, so I feel like I'm the 1. I'm hanging on, but then I also feel like I can pretend to be a 20. 20 was speaking to me too, because I feel like a 1, but I can act like a 20.
Thank you. We're going to jump now to a couple of our Part C office folks, Tammy and Rachel.
Good morning, everyone. Well, 9 looks like here she's having some fun. I think I keep being drawn to the combination of 2 and 3 because I think I like to help people. I like to be of support. I like to support people. So I think of myself, as a 2. I feel very comfortable in a 2 today.
Right.
Good. Oh, I did this again. This camera, I swear. Well, good morning, everybody. I'm Rachel, and I'm the lead policy, Medicaid, and billing specialist with the HHSC ECI state office. I would say yesterday I would have been a 9. I got a few ego boosts that put me in a really good mood. But today I'm closer to a 1. I have a few approaching deadlines for a big project I'm working on, and I'm actually taking 2 additional days off this weekend. And so my deadlines fall on a day I'm not working. So I'm trying really hard to get those taken care of today and put out some fires, but it'll be fine. I'll have a great weekend and it'll be nice.
All right, next let's go with Julie, Christina, Matthew, then Christy. Julia, Christina, Matthew, then Christy.
Hi, I'm Julie Yoakum. I'm the ECI director at Brighton Center in San Antonio. And I feel like I'm at a 10 today.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Christina, and I am the team leader for Region 16 ECI, and I feel like I'm at 3. I'm accomplishing things and kind of trying to climb up.
Hello, I'm Matthew McCormick, the relatively new IDEA Part C policy specialist here in the Austin office. And I'm also a 3 because I'm learning about the program, and I have Rachel and Tammy being my 2s and helping lift me up. So.
My mouse keeps disappearing.
Sorry,
Right.
was I next?
Yes.
Okay. I'm Christy Shaw. I'm the program director for West Texas Center's Little Lives ECI out here in West Texas. I feel like I'm a 9. I'm sort of swinging around out here. We're in the middle of our grant and our budget process, and that's all due on Tuesday. So a little bit crazy swinging around out here, but thank you.
We'll keep hanging on.
Thanks.
So I think last we have Megan and Patricia, and I apologize if I skipped anyone else. I'll ask that after Megan and Patricia introduce themselves, if you will as well.
Hi, I'm Megan Taylor. I'm with Little Lives ECI. I'm an early intervention specialist, service coordinator, and a training coordinator under Christy Shaw. And I feel like I'm probably 16 since Christy's working all the grants. I'm just helping all the new girls get that stuff done. So I think I'm like a 16.
Thank
you. Good morning. I'm Patricia Reedy. I'm actually with Partners Resource Network, which is the PTI for the state of Texas. I serve on various ECI committees, including the retention one, which has been working on these. So I'm kind of lurking today to keep up and make sure I know what's going on. And I can't decide if I'm a 5 or a 3 because I'm planning 2 conferences at one time. So I could either be climbing the tree or throwing a tantrum. Take your pick.
Is there anyone that I overlooked? Unintentionally. Emphasis on the unintentionally. All right. Well, I want to thank you again for being here today and taking just a few minutes to share where you are, because I think it's important that we appreciate and value that we're all in different places. And this really connects to our topic of mentoring, because we also have to recognize, despite the best well-laid plans, our new employees are in different places, not just because of the work and the assimilation, but personally. And so, having a pulse on where we are, how we're feeling, how we're doing, is really critical, if you will, to our work. Our focused outcomes in our time together. I developed these based on reflections from the ECI Summit, a review of many of the action plans that were submitted with goals that related to mentoring specific, and of course, conversations with the UTEP team. So the intended outcomes are, as stated, to identify elements of a mentoring program and their relationships to one another. Many of you are doing fantastic separate things in your organization. You've got robust training, you're pairing mentors and mentees. So what I hope to facilitate today is a mindfulness of how the efforts are or can be connected to make them more robust and intentional. And so in doing so, we're going to engage in some focused reflection on the strengths of what you're doing. We're going to identify strategies for intentionally, emphasis intentionally, implementing evidence practices that do in fact impact professional growth of mentees, while also supporting mentors. A lot of times we get focused on the mentees, and our mentoring program is only going to be as strong as the support and guidance that we give our mentors. And then we're going to strategize some intentional ways to add depth and fidelity to your mentoring program. So I've shared the preliminary design and purpose for this time that we have together, but what's truly most important is your why. So if you don't mind, I'm going to ask you in the chat to please briefly state what is your goal for this dedicated time today to further exploring mentoring. If you'll please add in the chat, I'll give you a minute, your goal. Again, I'm giving you a minute just to think about what your goal is for this time together associated with exploring mentoring. Oh. All right. So I realized I caught you on the spot. I'll probably catch you on the spot a few times throughout this time together. You've been warned. Just kidding. Contribute when and can when you can, to the degree you can. But again, for me, it's really important to know why you're here. You signed up, you registered, you're dedicating your time. And so I want to make sure when everything is said and done, we've hopefully met your goals and intended purpose for being here. So thank you, those of you who shared. As we begin, I do want to focus our attention to the definition of mentoring. For those of you who are at the ECI Summit in Dallas, you'll recall that you individually and collectively shared your definitions. And then I had also shared the definition that you see here on the screen. What is highlighted were the most commonly phrased words that you used. And I think it's essential as we begin this conversation that we look back to that definition, the emphasis on collaboration, relationships, facilitating and scaffolding new employees and mentors through purposeful stages that facilitate the personal and professional growth of those individuals. I also want to revisit, I always like to take a step back before we take a step forward, and it lets those new to the conversation know where our conversation has evolved. There are two primary types of mentoring, formal and informal. And while these are very separate, but yet related, today we're going to be focusing largely on intentionally designed formal aspects of mentoring that give way for some of the informal interactions to flourish and ultimately support a holistic program. And so in saying holistic, when I was thinking about this, my thoughts kept going back to this quote, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. And then when I pulled it up and looked at it, I realized that I, along with a lot of other people apparently, often misquote this. The whole is something besides the parts, is what Aristotle had actually said. And though this related to math, and specifically systems, in my mind, I think it's critical that we think about mentoring in terms of the whole of what we do. Again, we tend to focus on elements or pieces. We pair people, we do this, but what we often don't step back and reflect upon or build is that holistic approach. So I'm going to ask you to keep, if you will, this quote at the forefront of what we're going to be exploring. So in most of your action plans submitted, individuals, when you talked about your mentoring programs, many of you talked about like mentor pairing, stipends for mentors. Essentially, you talked, your action plans addressed one little piece. I don't know if you can see my mouse swirling. Can you see my mouse swirling? Okay, good. Essentially, your mentoring things spoke about one piece. Yet I know from the ECI Summit that some of you shared elements such as a very robust training. This is where what we want to do is peel back the layers and think about, besides pairing people off for them to coach, engage, have conversations, varied levels of support that are often informal, that we look to see what else is there and how are some of the other things that we're doing connected to the holistic intent, if you will, of our mentoring. So I want to ask if anyone, for example, would like to share examples of some of the training that you do that is connected to mentoring, whether that's for the mentors or the mentees. Does anyone want to share an example of the training that you do or the professional learning that you do for either the mentees or the mentors related to professional growth?
We have something called Lunch and Learns, where we have team members within our program do a presentation on, say, their field that they're in. So we have a dietitian who did a presentation for our entire staff, and then it's an opportunity for my staff to ask her questions. Maybe they share a child together and they had some more. So it's a training on what nutrition is for the kids in our program, but then it's also collaborative, and then it becomes where she's established as somebody who they can contact and, I guess, get mentoring in specifically on nutrition. So.
Perfect. Does anyone else want to share the type of training that they do, maybe explicitly tied to mentoring?
We have monthly discipline specific meetings and kind of get a collaboration from all of the staff on what that topic would be, and then have a presenter and give the staff opportunities to ask each other questions and kind of mentor each other in that way. And then the information shared within the discipline specific meeting is carried over, not to the depths that we were able to cover in that meeting, but on a generalized basis at our weekly staff meeting.
Fantastic.
We do those things as well, and we've started kind of pairing new staff. We just happened to get an influx of new staff. So what we are doing is we're kind of pairing them with people that are kind of what we would consider subject experts in like evaluations and in transition. And so we're kind of pairing them with certain staff for that part of their learning process. And then maybe moving on to, again, a different like transitions or something like that.
Perfect. So I noticed, oh, go ahead.
I was saying at the Harris Center, they have partnered with the Texas Council Risk Management Fund, and they provide seminars for how to improve motivation in your staff, how to trust your staff, the characters and whatnot. And I just took that like a couple of weeks ago.
And do the mentors go through that, or do the mentees go through that?
The mentors go through this to teach us how to, respond to our mentees.
That's wonderful. A lot of times, going back to the support, and many of your action plans address this. You pair, you provide a stipend, but a lot of times we don't think of what specific guidance, parameters, expectations that we're providing to the mentors. Again, we have pieces, but we don't have some of the intentional connections, so that if you're asked to be a mentor and you're getting this stipend, that there are expectations associated with that and some support that's going to be provided to help them be successful. Another example is goals. I'm going to apologize for not remembering specifically from the ECI summit that I remember. It might have been Anisha shared, they had a very explicit onboarding process. Anisha, am I correct?
Yes, and I didn't know if you wanted me to, since already to talk, but we do a PAL program, and so it's someone with experience helps new hires in like disciplines. So we do it for every discipline that we have, and they kind of walk them through just the training process, but also what to do in the day of the life, It's about 13 weeks, but we have lead disciplines as well that support the staff, you know, ongoing for their tenure or so forth. But we're, you know, we have over this last year hired a lot of new people. So we're always kind of looking at our processes and seeing what's working, what's not working, satisfaction, etc. We definitely get feedback on how much the new hires appreciate someone being there alongside with them that also can relate to the day in the life outside of it really just being their supervisor. So.
And so, you know, to that part with the goals, sometimes we have our onboarding efforts and we have some of those leads and the disciplines, but even having systems in place where periodically after a training or professional development for the new mentors, like I think what like or the new mentees, like what Crystal talked about, a very specific topic, you send a, you know, a blast to the mentors. Hey, they've just gone through this. In your next conversations, make sure you're making explicit connections between what they've learned and how they're applying it or how they see themselves applying it. Little elements of structure like that seems so simple and take literally just 5 minutes, make a big impact and fidelity of those people actually implementing what you discussed and seeing how what they learned or the challenges, discussing what challenges they see in actually doing it, give way to the depth of some of the support that the mentors are able to provide. It becomes targeted instead of, so tell me what's going on. How are you doing? It's like, all right, so I know you've learned about A and you've been doing this. What are the challenges? How do you see yourself doing it? Which then opens up for example, successful coaching. A lot of us are very well trained in coaching families, collaborating with other service providers, but often aren't necessarily trained in coaching peer professionals and the competence and the confidence that it requires to give constructive feedback and not just blanket statements like, oh, you'll do fine, you'll get through it. Or what we want to do is, because we have some of those, that expertise in a lead discipline area, we want to tell new people, do this, do that. And so back to the support and the interrelationship between support and coaching, it is critical that we train our mentors in effective coaching skills. And there are great resources like the Art of Coaching and other programs that kind of bring to the forefront the parallels between coaching families, if you will, and coaching other professionals. But there's a niche to be able to give the feedback, to learn how to ask questions before we tell, to let people come to be mindful, our mentees to be mindful and reflective themselves of what's working, and intellectually humble and being able to say, I don't know what the hell I'm doing. Someone please help me. I'm curious to know if any of you do any coaching training for your mentors, and if so, what does that look like? Or do you feel like it's not needed? I mean, be honest.
I definitely think it's needed. For our mentors, we do have the lead staff go over the PAL plan, but we also regularly have, well, each month coaching cafes to just build on coaching and reflective questions in general, and just kind of breaking down the components of, you know, really for visits, but then how can we use kind of those same components in meetings, you know, with the staff. I was also gonna notate all of our supervisors, which might be an idea moving forward for the PALs, but the trauma stewardship book, we've had really good feedback on.
So that is a phenomenal example of explicitly kind of bridging the gap and empowering your mentors to see how the strategies they use are used with the mentees. And in turn, it is modeling for the mentees what it is we want them to do with families. So again, there's a very intentional thing, and sometimes we know we're doing things, but what we want to do is make that explicit for the people involved so that they're aware, they feel, they appreciate the value of it. I'll say I noticed also on your action plans, many of you are focused on celebrating successes. And some of those successes are associated with the milestone of expectations and, you know, who's doing this expectation, who's clocked this much stuff. Make sure that when you are celebrating the successes, you're giving opportunity for the mentees themselves to recognize the goals that they've achieved, because sometimes individuals' biggest goals aren't necessarily the same goals that we're looking for. And so in those events that you're planning and doing, create a space either with a group or encourage the mentors to pause and reflect in experiences in the mentor-mentee relationship on some of those successes. And to that point, because we all know positive reinforcement is so critical, what are some examples of the way that your mentoring efforts reinforce the successes of either or both the mentees and the mentors? All right. Well, think on it. Crystal, sorry.
That's okay. I was debating on whether or not this was applicable or not, but I'll say it anyway. So within our teams, we do friendly little competitions, and we have the staff that maybe aren't as worried about that. And then we have the other staff within their group that are very much encouraged by, oh, you got 20, I'm going to do 22. And so we use that to just make it fun and make it a good time while still keeping the bigger picture in focus. And I feel like that has been really helpful within our group to just keep the positive motivation going, and continue to help them from a director standpoint to the leads to be carried through to this direct service staff.
Right. And so, Crystal, I'm glad you tied the success to the motivation, because that is, you know, a critical relationship. And the more explicitly those things are connected and continually reinforced in whatever organically grows with your people, whether it's a competitive spirit, whether, you know, go back to the blob tree, everyone's a little different. And we have to design the reinforcers. We talk to families about this with children. We have to design the reinforcers to match the need of the people. And that's where our mentors are so critical, because our mentors best get a pulse of what lights their fire, what drives them to want to succeed. And then when we are planning as an organization those events, before we do so, read again, quick communication out to the mentors. What are the things that matter? What types of reinforcement do they need? Because the ice cream social or the this, that, and the other is all fine and dandy. Somebody go, yeah, I had a great time. But was that time actually reinforcing for the work that's going in? So many of y'all, gosh, when I read your action plans, it was, you know, it's just reality, the challenges that everyone is facing right now on an emotional level, on a work overload level. And it speaks to how, or at least our mentoring program, if we're going to retain people, it speaks to how from the get-go, it's not just enough to onboard them and say, you're going to go through orientation, you're going to complete these modules, you're going to do everything on this checklist, and boom, you're going to be working with families. We have to be able to paint a picture of, here is what we're going to do as an organization to support you. Lauren.
Okay. So one thing I have, I use technology a lot to communicate with staff, because of course, all of my staff is out there in the field, far, far away. And so once they share certain things with me, or they have made productivity, or they told me that they were having a bad day the day before, I would send just little text messages here and there for reassurance, like, hey, I remembered that you had a bad day yesterday. Glad you're out here today. Just little short text messages to various staff, just to know, like, I am here, and remind them that I'm supporting them and I know what they're going through. So they don't have to explain, well, I didn't do X, Y, and Z because of blah, 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 blah. I'm trying to reinforce that I know that you had a hard time yesterday, but I'm glad that you are out here. I see that you have these many families scheduled today. Awesome job. Da-da. Just nice, quick text, and then move on. And they really do appreciate quick text messages.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's a personal element. So a newsletter or an email blast, everyone, you're doing a great job, we appreciate you, is fine and dandy. But really, it's that personal level of success, of reinforcement, of connection, that fuels the motivation. That fuels the motivation. And the reality is that some of you are in very big programs. I just remember my mind being blown about, serving 5,000 children and families, and some of you have very small programs. And when we're designing a mentoring program, again, it is keeping in mind all of the pieces, how they're intentionally connected, and then how we are communicating. It's the pragmatics. It's how we're communicating that work, so that our efforts as leaders are in turn building the capacity, if you will, of others. So let me just ask, this was an image that I found online and I absolutely loved it. Hence, wait, I got to do my point. I even chose to use it as my background screen. Is there another element of a mentoring program that you think is critical in your experience, but that's not listed here? And you can say it or put it in the chat, but I'm just curious if there's another piece of the equation that you think is critical, but not reflected here. Right. If you think of something, add it to the chat. All right. So details matter. As you design, as you revamp, as you revise, you have to see and explicitly share how the elements holistically support and are interwoven with the intentional and focused assurances of relational quality, to support and retain, if you will, your staff. So all of our little pieces, recognize, what do we do well? Again, we have a great training program, but we're not sure that our training program and the paired mentoring are connecting. So is there an opportunity for us to weave in things? We have great orientation and onboarding that last 6 weeks, 1 month, 3 months. And then we also have paired mentoring. How are we including our mentors in that onboarding so that they have a good pulse of where people are individually? Looking, if you will, I just realized my picture doesn't have the little circles of all of the, at the end of these strings, of all of the things you're doing and how specifically we're focused on that holistic support. So what we're talking about essentially is the premise of the golden circle. Have y'all, any of y'all ever saw the TED Talk on the golden circle? I'm looking for yes, no's, don't know what you're talking about. All right, well, I have a copy of the book. It's, oh, this is what happens when you use a background. I'll put it right here. It started with the why. Anyhow, Sinek did a TED Talk that's really kind of famous. It's this very simple thing used largely in business, but so applicable in my mind to intentionally designing, if you will, a mentoring program. And basically, we tend to focus on the what's. What are we doing? We're doing this, we're doing this, we're doing this, we're doing this. And most of the people in our organization can tell us what we're doing and what is offered. Some might be able to tell or explain how we're doing things and how they're connected. But very few outside of you and maybe your other members of your leadership team truly understand the why of mentoring. We tell people we're going to give them a mentor to support them, but we don't outline all the whys. We're doing this to support your emotional and physical, professional and personal growth. We're doing this because we want you to stay. We're going to invest in you so that you will invest in us, of yourself. So we have to articulate, if you will, and start with our why, going back to our definition of mentoring, our personal purpose. Why are we mentoring these people? And ensure that our mentoring program is, in fact, all those what's are fueling our why. So that when we do a survey after 6 months of our new people and ask them what they thought about things, they're not sitting there going, I didn't know that was a part of the mentoring. Or, oh, that was what I was supposed to get out of that. We want to make sure that everyone knows our why. So I got another thing for you. I want right now for you to either say it out loud or put it in the chat. What is your why? Why do you have a mentoring program? Anyone want to share verbally? Oh, to retain and support. Perfect. Thank you. I love that someone mentioned to support the tough, to help people navigate the tough but very rewarding part. Induction into ECI, there's so many dynamics at play that new staff can often feel very, very overwhelmed. Feelings, emotional feelings of successful, motivation to stay. Oh, my little mouse keeps disappearing, supporting staff. So thank you for saying your why. Before I'm going to ask you to share in some groups, some breakouts that we're going to do, I want to share with you an overview of the mentoring program that I contributed to developing at UH Clear Lake. Keep in mind, this mentoring program was designed for new teachers. And so that's the context. But the overview is applicable and reinforcing to what I'm trying to emphasize and bring to the forefront of your mind today. Our mentoring program, we started with our why. Actually, we were doing a few things and we realized that very quickly. We were talking about how are we going to pair people? What are we going to do? How are we going to communicate? And we just weren't getting any traction. We were working really hard at working really hard, but we weren't necessarily making an impact in supporting new teachers, particularly in their first 2 years. So we went back to our why. And our why was to support the personal and professional growth of new teachers. We wanted to do so as a university as a complement to some of the technical things that the school districts were doing. So we came up, our leadership team came up with 5 ideals that were the threads that run through the what's of what we do, the connectors between our why and our what, and that was our how. So our how was 5 ideals through 2 approaches. So we wanted to be progressive, have an outlined plan, but we also wanted to have embedded opportunities to be responsive to the emerging needs that surfaced. And so our 5 ideals focused on consistent reciprocal communication, not just shooting things at people, but those opportunities for reciprocal communication, active, authentic involvement of the mentors and mentees, individualized support, so that we have an overarching framework and plan for our mentoring program. We wanted to make sure we had a realm of resources for mentors that could really help them meet people where they were. So we started working with someone and we realized, oh my goodness, we've got to help them with classroom management. The mentor then had the backing of things to be able to go in and individualize everything to the alumni or new teachers. For us, it was on teaching relationships, really doing things to support those mentors and mentees. So it's not enough to give the mentor a stipend, but what other types of resources, are they going to get a $50 gift card so that over the next couple of months they can take the person for coffee, do things so that the mentor isn't being taxed beyond their means to try to do the relationship building things that are needed. And then, of course, ongoing professional learning for both the mentors and the mentees, and opportunities for both to reflect. So that was our how. And then our what, we had a clearly delineated realm of specific types of things that we would do. So obviously the one-on-one mentoring was a piece. We had supplemental customized support. So if we had an early childhood special education teacher who was really struggling to embed interventions in daily routines, we had some experts that we could bring in to supplement the mentor-mentee relationship, and who could model or coach the individual with what they needed. Topical professional learning experiences, like what many of you do. We also had a bunch of online services. We had some people who they were actually a little bit overwhelmed by interactions and needed space to come into their own confidence and know themselves and their professional identity before too much interaction. So we had a framework, or we have a framework. And I share this framework because the why, the how, and the what we do all align with our purpose. So what we're going to do next is I'm going to ask Chris to, let me pause real quick. Would you be able to share the what? Yes. I'm going to ask Chris to create some breakout rooms, and I'm going to give us 15 minutes. There are 23 here. Chris, I'm going to ask if you will please do 3 breakout rooms so that there's 5 to 6, let's see, 4 breakout rooms. I'm sorry, 4 breakout rooms so that there's 5 to 6 people in a room. I'm going to float between the rooms, probably as our maybe Bev or Chris. What I'd like for you to do after processing the last hour is share a strength. If you had to pinpoint a single strength of your mentoring program, what is that strength? And then after reflecting, also think about what is a component. Think about those elements that you desire to add, to enhance, to merge in order to add depth to what you're doing presently. So we're going to have 15 minutes, and I'm going to ask that once you get in the groups, if one person from each group will be prepared to share out at the end of our breakout session, what were the common strengths and what are the areas that people most want to focus on? Are there any questions? All right, I'm going to ask Chris to put us in groups. We'll be there for 15 minutes, so we'll come back at 11:17.
I didn't join a breakout room since I was just lurking and listening, and I was doing 4 or 5 other things, including talking at the same time. So I just wanted to know, I'm still here and I was listening. I just wasn't, I didn't have a lot to contribute to mentoring.
Right. Let's see if Chris is able to maybe get you with a group just to listen and participate.
Well, I didn't have a whole lot to contribute to it, so I didn't want to interrupt their group by participating because I figured they had more to go. I just wanted to know because we talked about it so much in our last meeting for the things that we were doing on retention. So I wanted to hear everybody talking, but I didn't really have a lot to contribute to it.
Gotcha. I understand. I understand. All right. Well, Chris, I'm not a thing, so I don't know how to float. Join a
Is there something
breakout.
I can do, Angie, to make Elizabeth?
I don't see how. I mean, I think if you click on her name and that little 3 dots, I don't know if it'll allow you to, because for some reason it doesn't allow me to make her co-host also, because I was trying to
Because
do
I can make her host.
Yeah.
Will
Yeah,
that
try making her
destroy all
own.
the breakout rooms?
Yeah.
I just wanted to be able to float
Yeah,
in the,
I want you.
Yeah.
in the different breakout rooms.
If you can make your host, I think then she would have access to it.
Do you have access, Angie, to go into any breakout room?
Okay, I'm co-host now, so let me see if I can.
Let me see.
I can. You whatever
Okay.
you did.
We
you
figured
did.
it out.
We figured
So,
it out. We did something.
I'm gonna float in and out of some of the different breakout
Do you want
rooms.
us to go in as well, or you're gonna? I don't want to.
I would love for you to just float in as well and kind of hear some of what's going on. I'm gonna start with number 1. How about you start with number 4?
And then we'll go backward. Perfect.
Yeah. All right. Welcome back. Got slowly, everyone's coming back to us. So I want to apologize. There was one group that I did not get to, so I'm so sorry I was unable to get to the one group. What I would like to do now is ask if the one person from each group will please share very briefly. We're just going to spend a minute or two on this. Share very briefly the strengths that you heard, whether individual or a pattern. And then were there specific components that are elements of the mentoring program that people were talking most about? And then if you will, I'm going to add a third thing that I'm going to ask you to discuss. So the two things on the screen, but the greatest challenge. So I heard a lot of challenges, and that often bubbles up when we're talking about what we do good and what we, oh, but how do we do this? So I'll ask one person from each to also share what was the theme, if you will, of the challenges that people face. So do I have a volunteer? We had 4 groups. Do I have a volunteer for one of the groups?
I took some notes for our group. We had 3 in our group. As far as our program, we haven't implemented a mentoring program yet, and so I'm learning. But the strength for us was that we do have people that we could create into mentors. So hopefully with all this information, we're going to go ahead and do that. So of course, the challenge for us is to how do we implement it, and what we want to add a mentoring program. We had Veronica in our group out of El Paso, and she had a really great structure as far as she was a mentor in the past, and I feel like her strength was a really structured mentoring program where she did have a stipend, she did have a lower caseload, and then she had very specific things that she would do with her staff when she was mentoring them. I think one of the things that she wished she could have had more time to do was more time in the field with the staff. And so I think she had like a 30-hour week where she would provide services and maybe 10 hours out in the field mentoring, but she wished she had more time for mentoring because people needed more mentoring. And then Lauren with the Harris ECI, she's relatively newer in her position, but she has lots of experience. And I feel like Lauren's has lots of great ideas for her program. And I feel like your strengths that you care so much about, the people in the field. And I think ultimately that's really what's important about mentoring your staff. And then, she essentially wants to continue to add to that program and do more mentoring. And I think the challenge was the difference between, onboarding your staff and throwing them out in the field and just giving them a huge caseload because you need them out there, or how do you slowly introduce them out there? So I think that's one of the big challenges with what we do. So hopefully that covered everyone's information.
Thank you, Christy, for sharing that. Do we have another group?
I'll share for us. I think one of our biggest strengths was that we were all implementing some type of a mentoring program. I think we were able to kind of see what we needed to work on, but it seemed like everybody had at least started or was working on a mentoring program. I think things that we wanted to add was how we mentor our mentors. So we did talk about some, maybe some leadership trainings, because, the idea is they're a strong, maybe EIS or a strong speech therapist, but we really haven't taught them how to teach other people how to do that and how to reflect with other staff and how to support them in a way, and not just like, this is what I do, and just let me just show you what I do, but really sit there and be able to answer their questions and support them and be a leader, because that's what we are really, we're seeing them as a leader. So teaching them how to be that leader. I think the challenges is a couple of our a couple of the ECI programs are so spread out and they have so little staff that, you know, mentoring one-on-one in person is would be very, very difficult to do. So, you know, and we try with our pals in our program, we do try for them to ride along with the person. They can ask them questions, and that is invaluable time they have with their pal. And so I do not have an answer, but I could see how that would be a huge challenge if, you know, you're always mentoring virtually, or I'd love to come out with you with this kid that you're struggling with, but that's a 2-hour drive. So yeah, that was one of the biggest challenges that was mentioned.
Thanks, Molly. I think that was a common theme that we heard across the groups as a challenge. Let's see, we have 2 more groups.
I can go for our group since I was taking notes. Let me open that up. So in our group, we had 3 individuals from ECI programs, but we also had me and Matthew from the state office. So I think we got a pretty interesting perspective. For some of the programs, one of the strengths is that they do have pretty much the whole system laid out for the first 13 weeks, all the processes and procedures and training that are needed for each individual staff, both at the agency level and at the ECI state level. They pretty much have that all planned out. But with some other programs, they don't really have a full mentoring program. They are able to send their staff out on a lot of observations with different disciplines, but they don't have a specific program in place. And in a lot of situations, that does contribute to turnover. But then there are other programs where there's not a lot of turnover for them because there's not a whole lot of other opportunities in the area. So that was something that was talked about a lot. Some of the things that were looked into implementing was, of course, an actual mentoring program, something that's planned out. And while what they've been doing works, it would be beneficial to have like a go-to person for each new staff who's different from their team lead or supervisor, so they can go for advice, ideas without any of that fear of repercussion. Now, some of the main struggles we heard, similar to Molly, was the travel between locations to the closest person can sometimes be an hour, 2 hours away, depending on how big that service area is. So it's a really big struggle to get out there and provide that mentoring when it's hard to collaborate as a whole team in general. But another thing that was brought up that's more specific to the state office is kind of extending the length of the initial orientation training because it often feels kind of rushed. And then those new staff don't feel prepared to go out into the field. And so perhaps looking into some things we can do on our end to make that initial training a little more in-depth and useful for the staff. So it was really good it's a good conversation to have.
Awesome and phenomenal notes that you shared. Very well articulated. Thank you. Okay, last but not least, we've got one more group.
I'll go. So we talked about the strengths, some that we had. I think in both cases, and Jesse, I'm sorry, chime in if I got this wrong, but I think in both cases, we don't really have that formal mentoring program yet. But I think in both cases, we definitely see the benefits of it. We have a plan that's getting started. We have a desire. And I know for our, the informal piece, I think we definitely have people who are willing to do it. And it's where we feel there is a little bit of lack there is kind of just that structured piece to kind of get it all together and make sure that we're helping the mentors understand what their role is, and not only in the formal sense of what they should be doing with staff, but also kind of the informals of it. So helping them understand, what it means to it doesn't always have to be about the training piece. You can show empathy, you can hear them out. How do you help support them when a staff member is struggling? Kind of that emotionally kind of that piece of it. And then I think we both agreed that the biggest challenge is time, is really kind of time on how we set up the training, how we set up all of this, and make sure that it's all together in a very structured way so that on all sides it will go well upon implementation.
So Julie, I just want to chime back in for a minute and say, for many of you who are starting or have fundamentals like an outline, like we have a way to pair or something, but not a whole program, I want to encourage you to engage not just your leadership team, but some of your new employees. Use it as an opportunity to, I don't like the phrase buy-in, but get input from the new people, the people who are there and have stayed the course, and say, look, this is something we're trying to do. So it's not just on your shoulders to design and do for others, but let everyone contribute to why are we doing this? And then how, within the parameters, the context, the resources, the mileage, how, the framework of our how we're going to do things. What are the principles that are going to guide us? And don't bite off, if you will, more than you can chew. If you're starting, start small. What's our priority? What matters most? You know, we heard one of the main challenges for new and existing programs is that onboarding. So one of our principles might be an emphasis on the scaffolding of learning, time, resources, because again, going back to this, you might have phenomenal training. Their first couple of weeks, we have awesome training. And then we let them go and they leave. Because this is not connected to this. And they never get the chance to feel this, which all contributes to our mentoring. So I want to thank you guys for sharing. And it really did. It seemed like the theme as the greatest challenge that came up was the onboarding, the time committed to it, and how you're utilizing that time, and recognizing that the mentoring piece and the scaffolding piece is a big part of that training. So is there a topic or two less of the training that could be, that mentors themselves could be empowered to reinforce with direct time with others, you know, while they're driving, so that they can model, really looking at the most efficient way to design for yourself. So there are a few questions here to guide your reflection and guide the reflection of your team. You know, thinking about who's involved. As we just said, this doesn't have to be on your shoulders or the leadership team's shoulders. Get input from the mentors. What is it that they need? Get input from your new employees. Do a pre-survey and say, what is it that you would like to see in this mentoring program? And they might say, I have no idea. I don't know what I don't know. Okay. A week later, you've been through some modules and some training. What's emerging as something that's scary? You want to create multiple voices. Think about, will participation be mandatory or voluntary? We already touched on this. What works for your organization? What works for the people? And then set those parameters. Think about how long you imagine the formal aspects of mentoring to last. Are they going to go through 6 weeks of training, be given a caseload and say, good luck? one of the groups we talked about, it's really a balance, not enough or too much, because we also often don't have the time and resources to create a context of enabling people by over helping and over being there. We do eventually have to scaffold their independence, their confidence. So from the get-go, being able to say, look, generally, this is what we do. We're going to mentor you your first year, and it's going to evolve. In the beginning, it's going to look like this, and then it's going to look like this. And so the better defined big picture of your program, when you do release them at whatever point to their own caseloads, they're not going to feel like they're totally left to figure it out. They're going to know that they still have a lifeline to support. Think about what type of mentoring experiences will be available. What are the elements that you're going to do? And how are you going to make the explicit connections between them so that people know everything you're doing is for them? What forms of support you talked about? How are you going to ensure those relationships are emotionally healthy for both the mentor and the mentee? We don't want our mentors being overstressed and modeling, oh my gosh, I got to get out of here when we're trying to attract and retain folks, but also protect their confidentiality. I heard one group talk about different people, and that's often very important. We might initially have assigned mentors, but as our program evolves, we might want to have, through our professional development sessions or dialogues or coaching cafes, opportunities for people to mingle with others and allow the mentoring to take on more informal connections and support that, so that people have a space to be vulnerable. A new mentee might not feel safe articulating their insecurities about their competence or about their confidence. So varied experiences where they have an opportunity to meet with others and be vulnerable, and it feel like it's okay, because it is. It's overwhelming. And then thinking about, which many of you I heard talking about, what are some of the operational changes that need to occur? What do you need to do so that what you design can actually be implemented? And it's not just talk, or it's not just, giving a stipend to people, but what organizational or operational things need to be in place so that when you collect data at 3 months or 6 months, you're able to see what's really working or where priorities need to shift so that your why is being fulfilled and people are supported and they are staying. What other questions from your own experiences do you think are important for people to ask themselves? Are there any questions that you think are important to ask yourself?
I'd just like to say something about, when we set up mentoring programs, we want to make sure that they're not just lip service, right? And that there's a deep institutional or program recognition that this is important for us, right? It's a philosophy, or it's a aim that we all have, is that mentoring is critical for the
for the outcomes, which is going to be the improved services for our children and families, right?
Bev, thanks for adding that.
I think it's also important to be able to say what success will look like and how to measure that.
Yeah.
Overall, like right now, I don't even know what success would be. So being able to come to what those parameters are and being able to measure them, I think it's very important for us to get to that point.
You know, Stephanie, that's such a critical element. And it kind of goes back to, you know, your why. We think about when we're writing IFSP goals for children and families, right? We state things in a way that here is our focus and here's how we're going to measure it. And we know why we are doing that for the kids. We have a specific outcome in mind. And it is the very same for our mentoring program. Why are we doing this? And how are we going to know we're successful? And what are we going to do to measure it? That same process applies so that, again, when you collect that data, you're able to see, okay, so our 6-week training we think is great, but our new people in an exit interviews revealed that there wasn't a connection between the training and then what happened when they got their caseloads. And so we can then reflect and learn, we have to build in place in our onboarding and scaffolding a means of bridging that training to the authentic realities that they're going to face by maybe within the first week, giving them an example of a family and letting them apply what they're learning to how they might use this with that family. Instead of our random examples, let's give them a real example.
I think also just being able to identify what's not working quickly and being able to adapt to those changes, because what works for this group of people coming in, a lot of it will work for maybe the next group, but a lot of it may not work. And so being able to be fluid and make changes as you need to the mentoring program, just keeping those fundamentals.
And that's where also, Crystal, the informal pieces come in. So you have a formal framework, but that's where emergence and innovation and evolution happens meaningfully, is in those informal things, which are often the most substantive. And mentors need to feel empowered and supportive to evolve what they do. Thank you. So I want to take a few minutes to share. We've been sharing little tidbits throughout and in our groups, but some specific strategies, like naming some specific things for some of the targeted areas. And I want to start with mentors, because they're often the ones, as we've heard, that we don't think about first. We think about the mentees and what we're doing, and not the mentors. And so let's talk for a minute about support. And I know, for example, you're going to say, we're going to give them stipends. And I don't want to underestimate how important valuing someone's work is through a pay of a stipend. But when people are overwhelmed and have a great workload, that money often isn't enough and definitely doesn't ensure just because they're receiving a stipend that they're going to impart the quality that you expect. So I'm curious if you have any stipends, if you have any examples of support in the form of strategies that you do to alter time for mentors to do the work of mentors, or if anyone has strategies that they use for maybe specific resources that they provide to mentors. And I'll just ask you to share out. So I'm looking for examples of strategies for time for mentors or resources for mentors. And if you're not comfortable talking, you're welcome to share in the chat.
I know, like for our EIS leads, instead of them having their group of staff that they mentor and kind of wearing 15 different hats of tracking and following up on different types of the components of ECI, each of the leads has a special project in which that's their focus, and they support all of the EISs. However, they have their smaller groups that they're capable of helping with all of those day-to-day things, but each one has a different extra leadership role, I guess you would say, that they specifically focus on. Like we have our 28 days and we have transition and we have annuals, and they monitor those more closely so that the other leads don't have to have that as their main priority. And that seems to have been helping more recently, kind of with their workload, to support each other, and they work really closely together.
Does anyone have any questions about what she shared or want to know any more details? Are there any other examples of strategies that you use to support time? Do you have, aside from the stipend, do mentors have decreased caseloads? Do any of you give supplemental resources to mentors, like a packet of here's how to be a mentor? Anything along those lines?
So here in our program at Region 19, so that was one of the, I guess, the support system. It was to decrease caseload to allow for those hours out in the field.
Okay. Thank you. Anyone else? So maybe this is an opportunity for you to look at what are we doing to support our mentors and exploring. Feel free to reach out to me. Feel free to reach out to some who have shared what they are doing. But if you're not thinking about how you are supporting your mentors and doing it, then it's very likely that they're not feeling it. And so that might be an element that will help guide you to strengthen what you're doing. So we talked about guidance and expectations. I'm curious if any of you have strategies that you use for recruiting mentors, and if you will, how do you sell it? How do you get people to want to do it?
I think for us, we talk about it being in our culture, like our culture at Brighton, and because we have our core values that we even kind of associate with our annual reviews and things like that. And so I think we talk about those as opportunities for supporting our staff. And then on the other side of it too, I think what we try to explain is I have one team lead that says, okay, I've hired them. It's your responsibility to keep them here. And so it's kind of like, if you put in an effort to help support them and help them to be a part of our family, then that's going to ensure that they're going to want to stay. If they leave, then that means there's just more work piling up for you. So it's kind of like, how can we all work together as a team to ensure that the people we on board are successful and want to be a part of our family?
So then it makes it easy to recruit people to step up into those roles as their confidence grows, whether as a peer mentor, while they're still developing their identity as an early intervention professional, or those with the longevity and expertise. I love that you mentioned the culture of your organization. All right. Any other examples? What about training? Any specific? I heard several people say that needs to be a focus, but is anyone providing currently providing any specific training to mentors, and what part of that do you think is successful?
So I'll talk to that. We haven't exactly started our formal mentoring program, but we have talked about, so I'm one of the team coordinators and I'm also the lead EIS. So getting one mentor per regional team that we have, me being able to meet with them, and then they in turn go out and meet with more. That way I don't have to meet with all 25 EISs myself, and I'm empowering the mentors to go out and help. So it's like I came into management saying, okay, now I'm going to help 250 families instead of just the 30 or 40 that I worked with before. So it's empowering them to go out and help more, I think.
Expand their spheres of influence and reach.
So if I could add a question to what you're talking about, Elizabeth, I wonder how many of you all got any training for the positions you have? Because I know I never got any training as I moved up either. So I don't know how similar that might be in your situations.
Here's what I'm going to encourage you to do. In the chat, put yes or no. Yes, that you actually received training yourself in your leadership development, or no, you didn't.
Well, I think that's very telling, right? The answers we're getting.
No.
So now we're going to be in a role to support new mentors with what you have learned, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's what bubbles you up as a leader, being able to take on that challenge and learn as you go, and then be able to portray that onto the others. And that's how the mentors are bubbled up. And like I think you mentioned earlier, Elizabeth, not everyone wants to do it. And if you don't have the desire, most likely that person won't have the capability to be as effective as what you see in them. So it really has to come from within.
I agree. It has to be intrinsic, and you have to be a lot self-motivated and something that you want to do. And then just carrying that through to helping others want to, you know, be successful in wanting to do above and beyond as well.
And the reality is that you and maybe some of the longstanding people in your organization who are working or have the potential to work as mentors themselves never had these formal things in place. So there's an opportunity to design based on your path and the lessons learned. What would have been helpful? Where were critical periods in your professional development that you needed what and to what degree? And take those lessons from the rugged path journeys that you and others did and innovate and create mindful of that. Wow, Bev, I'm so glad you asked that question. So here's also, you know, a connection to where data matters and accountabilities. So we have someone who is a mentor, you know, or we're looking at our mentoring program. Are we just asking overall, how do you rate this? Are we really delving into holding the mentors accountable for recognizing that every relationship is neat? You can't formalize the requirements of a relationship. It takes trust. It takes communication. For some, it's going to take more than others. For some, it's going to be text, and others, you know, it's going to look different ways. But are we seeing if our mentors are actually building those relationships? Are we seeing if our mentees truly feel supported and feel like they can be vulnerable? Are we accountable and seeking accountability for the types of activities and experiences? Looking at all of those data sources that help us drive, innovate, revise, reflect, move, because your mentoring program can't be stagnant. As I can't remember if it was Anissa or Julie talked about, like it's got to grow with the organization. Or Crystal. I'm so sorry. I'm forgetting who said what. All right, we only have a few minutes left. I want to, on the left side, on the right side, the mentees. This is where we tend to focus. But I'm curious if any of you use any strategies for identifying the prioritization of the needs of your new staff. Or do you do it based just on what you think they need? Does anyone use strategies to get information from your new employees? So one thing I'm going to actually suggest is what I'm sensing is a next conversation is almost like a massive show and tell of just strategies. How do you do it? What does it look like? What is your framework? What are, the specific, if you will, strategies that you're doing, not broadly, but for targeted things? So one of the challenges that emerged in the group discussions was the onboarding and how to design onboarding that you can scaffold responsibility of taking on case management, that you can integrate support along the way. And maybe in a next conversation, looking very closely at some of the specific strategies for some of these specific areas. I had just included a slide for us to just keep in mind the principles of adult learning and that growth mindset. How are we continually growing the people, meeting them where they are and growing? So Chris and UTEP have a post questionnaire, but I would like you to also please in the chat write one takeaway. As you walk away from this, what is the one thing that is resonating in your mind that hopefully you can use, apply, think about?